time to paint some really vintage dudes with Toppy. I've got some old Terminators here. This guy is 2nd edition. They're all second-hand. This guy is also 2nd edition. I can never remember exactly what they're called. The Space Wolf Terminator guys. They had a name. This guy, however, pretty sure he's 1st edition, and he's a Grey Knight. Although the tab just says Terminator. He's definitely got the Nemesis Force sword there, and then I've got 2 with the Nemesis Force halberds. They're the older design, slightly rounder. I was going to say face, but helmet, slightly more rounded helmet. Now I'm going to paint these guys up as Space Wolves because the school that I work for has a War Games club that I run, and we have a little Space Wolves army for that. I've got all the paints here that I need, although not necessarily in the order I'll need them, and it's possible I'm not going to use all of these, and maybe some other things will come in, but roughly speaking, the paints I'm going to need, I'm going to be doing fairly fast painting techniques on these, because that's what I've done on the rest of that army. I actually painted them with my students, so I'm going to start off with some black, because Space Wolves being fairly pale, I've undercoated these guys with grey instead of my usual black. I'm just going to go in and re-undercoat effectively all the areas that are going to need to be metal. Well, at least the bits that are going to be silver. What I'll do is demo stuff on this figure, and we'll skip over all the bits of me painting the other figure. Alright, now we've laid that black down, we are going to go for some Green Stuff World Smoked Blue. It's a nice dark blue-grey. It's a great starting point for Space Wolves. This is one of the problems with second-hand figures. I've just noticed these big marks here where I assume there were tabs. I'm going to need to clean those up before I go on, but you can see how the colour's going on. I'm going to pause, I'm going to clean those up, and I'll come back once I finish this colour. Okay, I'm back. Sometimes when you're using second-hand figures like this, you're so excited to start painting something, and they're already assembled, you forget to check them. You've got to realise that when someone else has assembled something, it's not always going to be assembled to your standards. I think he's finished. The problem with using an undercoat other than black is anywhere you miss shows up as a bright spot, so I want to be careful about that. But I think I've got the blue-grey on all the bits the blue-grey should be on. So I am going to paint the other 4, and I'll see you when that's done. Alrighty, got a nice even coat of the smoked blue there. A little bit's got onto some of the black, but that's not going to be a problem. Also, you can see here, I actually need to paint those joint bits black as well, but that's fine. We can touch that up in a minute. So we're going to move on to our dry brush. We're going to use Wolf and Grey. So I've got a dry brush here. This is a Green Stuff World dry brush, size 5 apparently. I haven't used one of these before. We're going to find out what this is like. Get a bit of paint, wipe most of it off onto my paper towel, and I'm going to gently brush downwards on the figure, and it should just pick up raised areas. We're going downwards because we want to be going in the direction the light is coming from. If we were to brush upwards, we'd actually be picking up as if the light was underneath the guy. So you can see how that's actually picking out the helmet. We're going to do that all over. Alright, it's looking about right, so I'm going to paint the rest of them. So now that our dry brush is done, we're going to start picking out details, and we're going to start with bone areas. So I'm going to be using, no, that's the yellow. I'm going to be using desert yellow. This color separates like crazy, so it looks green at the top, but that's what it actually looks like. I'm going to be using desert yellow, and I'm going to be picking out the various iconography and bone areas. Some of those will end up being painted in gold, but gold will look much nicer over that color. When you're trying to speed paint, or at least paint things pretty quickly, using the same color for various things is always a good idea. So all of these purity seals, I am going to be treating the same way I'm treating all bone areas. That'll speed things up nicely. There we are. Oh, wait, no, there's one on top of his head. But that should be all of the bone areas good to go. A few of those are going to end up painted gold, but gold will look much nicer over this desert yellow base coat. So let's go and paint the rest of the guys. Time to finish off this bone. So we are going to use some green stuff world ivory tusk, any beige bone colour work, and we're going to be dry brushing this over the areas we've already painted with the desert yellow. I'm using an old brush for this. This is not the big dry brush I was using before because these are smaller areas, so I don't need as big of a dry brush. Alright, so a few of those areas are going to actually end up gold, so I haven't dry brushed those, but that's the bone stage done. I'm going to apply that to the rest of the guys now, and then we're going to come back and look at the next step. Well, I knew I'd forget some sort of colour, so I've got some burnt umber here, which we're going to be using to paint some detail pieces, such as the scabbards. Okay, we're pretty much up to finishing touches here, so we're going to be highlighting a few areas. The brown and the red will get highlighted. Also the grills at the back will need a little bit of work. Then we're on to metallics. Of course, there's those two feathers there as well. So we're going to start off with some ember orange to highlight our red. Next, we'll be using a bit of beastie brown to highlight the brown areas. And finally, a little dark grey for those black areas. And we're going to be going in and hitting a few of those things with washes as well. But of course, first, there's going to be some metallic stuff has to be painted, a few little finishing touches, and of course, I've got to catch up the other four guys. Okay, it's time for metallics. We're going to start off with some gunmetal on, surprisingly enough, the metal bits of the gun. Just going to paint along the sides of the barrels like that. We could dry brush this, but I want to slightly slightly cleaner look. Time for a real glorious gold now. Well, that's metal's finished on him. Time to get on to the other guys. We're going to take a little break from our usual demo Terminator because he's got a power fist, because I want to show you how to paint a power sword in a really quick, slightly cheaty but quite effective way. So we're going to start off with some Summer Sea blue here. Any fairly bright mid blue will work. Okay, we're going to go back for that wire there after the whole blade is finished. So that's step one. Okay, so we want a nice even coat of blue, and we want to make sure that it's nice and dry, because this next stage involves dry brushing. We're going to go up through probably 3 colours. We'll see how it looks. We're going to use an electric blue, whatever this extremely pale blue is, the name's rubbed off there, and white. We might go straight from electric blue to white. We'll see how it looks. So, standard dry brushing technique. We're going to wipe off most of the paint. We're going to start at the tip of the sword and dry brush down towards the hilt. And we're going to go heavy at the tip and just ease off further down so we get a sort of transition effect. Then we go up to the next shade of blue. Because they're all blue and it's all dry brushing on the same thing, I'm not actually going to worry too much about cleaning my brush out between. So this time we don't go quite as far, like so, and finally white. And there we go. Nice, simple, easily painted little transition. We can go back and fix up that cable on the side. Just want to fix up the edges of the blade there a bit. There wasn't quite enough on there. So nice, simple, quick effect. You can use that for any sort of power sword or magic weapon or anything like that. So back to our normally scheduled Terminator. Time for the final stage, the wash stage. We're going to start off with a little bit of umber wash, and we're going to wrap up things with a bit of black wash. And I usually thin down Vallejo washes just slightly. And we're going to be using this just to add a bit of detail, put some shade back into the bone areas. That's all of the umber wash he's going to need, so let's get the black wash out. There we are. That's going to have helped definition of a lot of pieces, quite a lot. So things will stand out a bit more now. So he's almost finished. There's a few final touches, and of course then there's basing. So our final step of painting before we get onto the base is to add a little bit of Vallejo Game Color Skin Ink. Now it has to be ink because ink has some gloss to it. We're going to be adding this to the gold pieces just to give them a bit of extra luster. I'm going to thin it down just a little bit. Vallejo Skin Ink's recently been reformulated. And it dries a little bit less glossy than it used to. So thinning it down just a touch will mean that a bit more of the gloss will show through. And you can see there on the scabbard and the emblem, that's just added a little bit of luster. So we're going to let this guy dry now. So here we are in the photo booth with our finished vintage Space Wolf Terminator. I skipped over the whole basing process. I thought I've already shown that in my second orc painting video, so we didn't really need to look at it here. But we can see how all the details come out and how everything's looking quite nice there. I spent 2 evenings to paint the entire squad, and I wasn't spending a huge amount of time each evening, so this was pretty quick to paint. These guys are definitely Grey Knights, but I've painted them up as Space Wolves so that everything matches nicely. Very vintage models here as well. I'm planning on going back and freehanding a design onto this shoulder shield here on this guy. I haven't decided what the design is going to be yet, but I am planning on going in and hitting that with a little freehand heraldry. So here's the last guy, another Grey Knight, and as I said, 2 evenings to paint the entire squad of 5, but I was only spending maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours on each evening actually painting. So not a great deal of time. I could have definitely done it in one evening if I'd sat down and just gone through the whole evening working on it. Well, that's that for my speed painted vintage Terminators. Not sure what's coming up next, but I'll see you then.